Y'all ready to start?
We are ready.
Yes, we are.
All right. Administrative announcement. This is a public meeting subject to the public meeting law, and it will be recorded. Deliberation of issues will only be conducted by private security, private investigators, policy committee members, unless permitted by the chair. Individuals who engage in disruptive behavior that impedes official business will be asked to stop being disruptive or leave the meeting. Additional measures may be taken to have disruptive individuals removed. If their continued presence poses a safety risk to the other persons in the room, or makes it impossible to continue the meeting, and I do have to apologize about the doggies barking in the background earlier. I have too many of them. So, hi everybody, how are you? I'm Dan Lentz, and I'm chairing this group, and we're doing introductions all the way around the room.
Yes, and if I call on you, please state your name and who you represent for the record. Chair Lenz, you introduced yourself, but you can go ahead and share who you represent.
Chair Lenzen, representing Venture Hospitality and Real Estate, Concept Entertainment 4, Dixie Tavern in Portland, Oregon.
Thank you. And then we move on to Vice Chair Hazenkamp.
Hi there, Jeremy. Jeremy Hazenkamp. I'm appointed to the board for DPST representing private security. And also I have a company, PacTech Protective Solutions, out of the Portland and Vancouver area.
Thank you. And then Member Berg.
Good afternoon, Ken Berg, representing the manufacturing industry, specifically for Amy's Kitchen down in White City, Oregon.
Thank you. Member Bauer.
All right, Ben Bauer. I am representing Armed Security Providers, and I am based in the Junction City area near Eugene.
Thank you. Member Herrera.
Hello, I'm Raul Herrera. I represent to the Alarm Monitor, Alarm Monitor representative.
Thank you. And then Member Nakasone.
Good afternoon, Nate Nakasone, unarmed representative, hailing from Pacific Patrol Services out of Portland, Oregon.
Thank you. Member Shanks.
I apologize. Samantha Schrantz with Schrantz Investigations. I am the elected private investigator committee member, and I am based out of Eugene, Oregon.
Thank you. Member Schultz.
Matthew Schultz, healthcare representative for Legacy Health System out of Portland, Oregon.
Thank you. Member Snyder.
Elena Snyder, private investigator, OSB appointed.
And then Member Stone.
Hey, Alex here, hospitality.
Thank you. And then now time for staff introductions. Juan Lopez, Executive Assistant, DPSST, and then Shelby, you can proceed from my left.
Shelby Wright, DPSST.
Chantal Haas, I am part of the private professional certification licensing program.
Emma Detweiler, DPSST staff.
Good afternoon, committee members. Susie Herring, private professional certification and licensing manager.
Catherine Calpine, professional standards division director.
Bill Castle, agency director.
Jennifer Howell, DPSST administrative rules coordinator.
And Bill Steele, deputy director.
Joanna Wade, budget analyst with DPSST.
And then if we have any staff online that would like to introduce themselves.
Michael Holsapple, compliance investigator, DPSST.
Thank you.
Ben Hamilton, compliance investigator with DPSST.
Is that everyone? I think we can proceed.
Thank you, Juan, and thank you to this amazing group, and thank you for spending a little bit of your very precious time. with this important conversation. But first, let's look at the meeting minutes from February 20th for approval. Do we have any conversation about this? No discussion. Looking for advancement of this. Do we have
I make a
motion?
motion to approve the minutes.
Do you have a
Burke
second?
seconds it.
All right. So just for process, do we ask for all those in favor? Do we ask for any opposed?
Chair Lindsay will actually do a roll call for that, and then we'll do that.
Copy that.
Right. Chair Lindsay.
Aye.
Motion to approve meeting minutes from February 20th, 2024. Chair Lindsay.
Aye.
Vice Chair Hasenkamp.
Aye.
Member Berg.
Aye.
Member Bauer.
Aye.
Member Herrera.
Aye.
Member Nakasone.
Yes.
Member Schranz.
Aye.
Member Schultz.
Aye.
Member Snyder.
Aye.
Member Stone.
Aye.
Motion carried.
Next thing on our agenda is the proposed rule changes for the Oregon Administrative Rule OAR 259-061-0010, presented by Jennifer Howell.
Thank you. Jennifer Howell for the record. So I have some opening statements that broadly apply to all three of the fee change agenda items. So I'll start with those and then we'll dive right into the PI ones for OAR 259-061-0010. Of course, today we're here to discuss fee increases for the private professional certification and licensing program. DPSST administers 3 fee-based regulatory programs. The private security provider certification and licensure, the private security entity licensure, and the private investigator licensure. As fee-based programs, the fees that are collected are used to pay for the department's costs to administer the program. These fee-based regulatory programs do not receive any other funding from the state. Personnel services, which include things like employee salary and benefits, make up more than 90% of the administrative costs. Other administrative costs include supplies, travel, technology services, rent, and legal services. Fees for each program and each certification and license type are calculated based on the estimated number of applicants for that specific certification or license, and the programmatic costs for issuing certifications and licensing, for ensuring compliance with the certification and licensing requirements that are found in an Oregon Administrative Rule and Oregon Revised Statutes. We're here today because the department is facing a revenue shortfall for the remainder of the 2023-25 biennium across all 3 of the private security and private investigator programs. All 3 of the programs have been impacted by a significant increase in the cost for personnel services. The cost for personnel services will continue to impact the 2025 to 2027 biennium, which is the next 2-year budget cycle. As well, each of the 3 programs has additional budget considerations that are unique to the program. In developing the recommended fee amounts, DPSST's goal was to provide adequate revenue to maintain operation of current service levels through the remainder of this current biennium, which is 2023 to 25, and through the next biennium, 2025 to 27. That's the broad overview. Again, on that agenda item 3 for private investigators, the investigator licensure fees are found in Oregon Administrative Rule 259-061-0010. Investigator licensure fees are established by the Board on Public Safety Standards and Training in collaboration with the Private Security and Investigator Policy Committee. The current fee for a 2-year private or provisional investigator license is $550. The licensing fee has not changed since the board and DPSST began regulatory oversight of investigator licensure back in 2006. The administrative costs for the private investigator licensure program have increased during the 2023-25 biennium due to increased costs for personnel services. This program is also impacted by the long-term cumulative effects from the past biennial budget revenues and deficits, and of course, inflation of operational costs over time. The department is recommending that the investigator license be increased to $690 and that the late renewal application fee be increased to $35. The memo that you received and the proposed rule changes for 259-061-0010 on page 2 state that the recommended increase was from $550 to $660. However, after additional discussion and calculation, DPSST, in consultation with the Department of Administrative Services, finds that the investigator license will need to be increased from $550 to $690, which is a $140 increase. Otherwise, the investigator licensure program is expected to come up short again before the end of the next biennial session. Of course, any fee change will have a fiscal impact on licensed investigators, applicants, and this agency. Your memo includes fiscal impact statements prepared by staff, and I'm just going to summarize those statements. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions and provide additional discussion. This rule change increases the fee for a 2-year private or provisional investigator license by an additional $140, and the late fee for renewal by an additional $5. The fee increase will have a fiscal impact on individuals who apply for a private or provisional investigator license. Applicants and licensed investigators may be considered small businesses. Therefore, this rule change for a fee increase will affect small businesses. For DPSST, failure to increase revenue through a fee increase will adversely affect DPSST's ability to provide customer service, issue investigator licenses, and ensure compliance with the investigator licensing requirements found in statute and administrative rule. The department recommends that the PSIPC approve the fee increases and the proposed rule changes for OAR 259-061-0010. Your memo includes 2 action items, one for approval or amendment of the fiscal impact statements, and one for a vote to approve the fees and the proposed rule changes. When you all get to action item 2, I'm going to request that we do an amended motion, and Juan has added that amended motion to the chat so it's available for everyone to read. But at this time, we're going to pause and open up, and staff are available here to answer your questions. Thank you.
This is Helena Snyder for the record. I was interested in finding out if we could learn numbers for PI licenses in the past couple of years and what is projected in years moving forward in order to understand why this significant increase.
You're looking for the number of applicants?
Current licensees as well as applicants over the past couple of years and even what is projected in the future.
You can speak up.
I unless you are you.
I was just going to what we based the we based it on 433 applicants annually. But this doesn't provide past years number of applicants.
It's an average. Okay. So we report to business services monthly on the applicants that we've received, whether it's new or renewing. Mm-hmm. And then we have a running average that we get annually. So the 433 reflects annually. So obviously a license is good for 2 years. So you almost would need to double it for that biennium.
Okay, so you're projecting double in the next 2 years is what you're saying from a licensee perspective?
Yes, okay. Because each year the average is 433 that would renew for their certification or be new. It's a collective average.
Okay, that's what I'm wondering is what are we getting new wise because I wonder if this is also going to discourage new incomers to the licensing.
I can tell you that as well. You just give me.
Yeah, I'm asking the questions, so I'm going to be patient.
I'd be happy to grab that for you. Last update. Average monthly is about 14 new PIs.
Okay.
And renewals can be anywhere from 18 to 20 or to 32, just depending upon the month.
But those coming and going from the industry, there's kind of an average total of licensed investigators at any one time.
Right. Yeah. This is just a collection of what's coming in monthly. So yeah, we're not counting the ones that drop off. We're only counting the new ones that are coming in to help with the projection.
Has there been, sorry, this is Helena still for the record, has there been any discussion as far as what other things could be offered to PIs if this increase were to go into play? Because as a licensee for many years, we have not had a lot of support as far as continuing education, essentially having the idea of bringing interns on, that kind of talk.
Susie Herring for the record. So our most recent conversation's been with our new learning and development specialist, Stephen Huizenga, and his background, he has a PhD and it was in ethics. And so he's looking forward to doing continuing education for PIs, first looking at ethics and then moving on to other things. So we're really hoping to utilize his skills to provide some more continuing education for PIs.
What about the idea of PIs becoming more of providing an internship for those that want to, become PIs, because that's not something that's ever really been addressed or brought up.
Can you explain that a little bit more, like in relationship with the department or in relationship to the applicant?
I guess potentially both in a way, okay. In the sense that maybe they get a reduced rate, or it falls under the provisional side of things where they get partnered up with an experienced and licensed PI that can, they can get the hours in that they need or what have you. Something that way that might actually also build more of a community side to our licensing area.
And are you suggesting that the individual that would be the intern would be receiving some sort of credit for that, whether it be continuing education or a cost reduction in the license? I just wanted to seek clarification.
Either. I haven't thought that far through.
Okay.
From that perspective, but definitely because there's the hour requirement.
Yeah.
I mean, that's definitely something. And I also, with regards to our licensing, we have so many CE hours that we also have to obtain as well. And was that taken into consideration when it came to increasing our licensing fee, because that takes away from the small business side that even Jennifer brought up, that if we don't work, we don't get paid kind of idea, but we have to pay for the CE as well.
Right.
So I didn't know if that was also brought up as part of the...
Not specifically.
Okay.
And member Shrans has her hand up.
Hi, Samantha Schrantz for the record. I heard that we have the annual average for this year, but we're making arguments that it's changed. So I was just curious what the previous annual averages were to get an idea of how much it has picked up in the last few years.
Susie Herring for the record. I don't think that that's what we were stating was changing. It was the fee was changing based upon the implementation date of the new fee, not necessarily the numbers, the average number that we have currently. That has not changed.
Oh, okay. I apologize. I thought the argument was that it hasn't changed since 2006. And so there's an argument that more needs to be done.
There hasn't been a fee increase for the PIs, and sorry, I lost my train of thought. And when we were looking at the amount that for the increase to be sustainable, we were looking at a fee implementation date of January 1, which we were told that wasn't feasible. We'd have to bump that out. So that kind of adjusted the fee increase amount to PIs.
Okay, but the annual about 433 has been consistent over the last multiple years.
I couldn't say specifically to the 433, but on average, we usually have anywhere between 700 and 800 active PIs in the system at any given time, if I were to run a report.
Oh, okay.
And Member Nakasone, you also had your hand raised.
Member Schrantz's last question, what I was going to ask is if the averages have remained consistent since 2006. So that answered it for me.
Perfect. And then Member Berg.
Ken Berg for the record. Regarding the proposed implementation date, I heard discussion around January 1, but that wouldn't be feasible. So do we have a projected potential implementation date for this fee increase to become effective?
Yes, this is Susie Herring for the record. We're looking at the beginning of February 1st of 2025.
Thank you. And this might be off topic just yet, but would that proposed date also fall under the private security sector as well?
Correct. It would be across all three programs.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Member Schrantz.
Samantha Schrantz for the record. Would now be a good time to bring up concerns that we have, or is there another more formal time for that?
Yeah, I think Jennifer laid it up so that we're doing discussions right now.
Okay, I wasn't sure if there's like specific things. My concern, and I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but there's been a lot of issues behind OPDS paying private investigators in a reasonable amount of time. And by that, I mean anywhere up to 8 weeks. And so I personally know that a lot of investigators, as you said, we are small businesses. A lot of us are only one-man operations, and we're not getting insurance, right? We don't have anyone overseeing us. So we're paying out of pocket for our insurance, for our continued education, for our licenses every 2 years. And I think that that would be more feasible if OPDS was paying us consistently. But I know that a lot of investigators are having a hard time paying their own bills right now just because our checks are not getting to us in a reasonable amount of time. And so I guess that's where one of my concerns is coming in, is if we're not getting paid for the work we're doing, how are we supposed to be able to pay to keep our licenses? And if we can't pay to keep our licenses, then we can't work. And it seems like a very difficult cycle for people that don't have the means right now, if that makes sense.
And Samantha, for the record, will you give the full name for the OPDS for everyone in the meeting, please?
I don't have it off the top of my head. I can look it up real quick. Or if
Oregon Public Defenders. I believe it's the Oregon Public Defenders. The Oregon Public Defenders, I believe, is what it is. This is Vice Chair Hazenkamp, but it's the Oregon Public Defenders. I can't remember the last initial, but basically it's
system.
The state. System. Yeah, but it's basically them paying for any work done for defense public defenders.
Thank you.
And sorry, Samantha Schrantz for the record. We also don't get paid out. We can't submit our bills until it has, at least for the state, until we have fulfilled the amount of hours for the authorization, which can be anywhere from 25 to 150 hours, or until the case closes. So for one case, I have 150-hour authorization. I'm not going to be able to fill that in for a few months. And so the lack of consistency in pay and getting investigators paid, there is no consistency or reliability at this time.
Helena Snyder for the record. Could you provide if there was any type of comparison done with other states and what that was?
Susie Heron for the record. Fortunately, I don't have that. We were really looking at what our revenue and expenditures were and what we would need to be sustainable, not necessarily looking at neighboring states to see what exactly they were charging.
Okay. As a licensed PI in another state, I know that we are one of the highest, at least on the West Coast, and always have been. So I guess I would hope that that would be taken into consideration as well.
Vice Chair Hazenkamp, did you still have something to add with your hand raised?
Yeah, I was actually looking to, I guess, some clarification on, and obviously Vice Chair Hazenkamp for the record. In regards to, we're talking about increases in cost of doing business. What were those specifically? Is that pay raises, adding more personnel to keep up with workload, or what were those actual numbers that we were having to, the reason we were coming up for the shortfall?
Do you want to pull that spreadsheet up?
We can. Who'd do best? Do this one.
Yeah, okay. So the one that says LIB and actuals. I would have sent that to you today.
I didn't see that in our packet. Was that in our packet, or the increases in cost? Did I miss that?
That one there.
No, it hasn't been distributed. So broadly, the state of Oregon does a pay equity analysis. Can I go ahead and speak to that? Or
sure.
Is that?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Does a pay equity analysis, and that pay equity change went into effect for the state of Oregon. It was announced in July and had an effective pay date of January 1st of this year. So that is a large factor in the costs for the agency, as well as the inflation of operational costs across, since 2006. The cost of doing business in 2006 and the cost of doing business in 2025 and 2024 are completely different. So there is now a shared sheet that shows the breakdown of what we had approved as a legislatively approved budget, so what the expected expenditures were, as well as what the current and projected expenditures are through the rest of the biennium, which ends on July 30th, 2025. So it breaks it down into what is personnel services, so what are the employees, what are the things that support the agency, such as the hearings, the background checks, the merchant card fees, our legal fees, and it breaks it down for each of those. Investigators are the third item in each of those lists. It's investigators that we're speaking to now. Is there anything else that anyone else would want to add?
Catherine Calpine for the record. And since I've been here for 8 months, the one thing that I found difficult both on the private security side and the professional standard certification side is the legal fees that we absolutely cannot control with DOJ. And to give you at least a little bit of confidence, Susie and myself, we have regularly meetings with Department of Justice because they've been astronomical, and we cannot, they have their pay increases the amount of time it's taking them to vet out their portion of this has taken longer. And so we are doing everything we can to, what do we need to do to try and shorten their length of time if we can? For example, one case alone on a professional standard side was $80,000. I mean, we're only budgeted $100 for the entire year. So that's just, I want to draw some attention to the fact that we have no control over those legal fees, depending on what is brought up, who contests what. That's outside our control, but yet we'll absorb it in either our fees or on the professional standard side in our general budget as well.
This is Joanna Wade, budget analyst. After reviewing their monthly financials, their actuals, they've cut everywhere they can for their office expenditures and other supplies. It's those legal fees and hearing costs that are eating up their budget, and then the personnel costs, which are 90% of their whole budget.
This is Helena Snyder for the record. I noticed for investigators in particular, the legal fees dropped significantly, but yet, I mean, it's projected, mind you, don't get me wrong. But then our fees we're being asked to increase our fees significantly more than the other licensees or the security side.
And that,
Follow up.
Susie Herring for the record, and that would go back to where we were going month by month to where we are today, because we didn't have a fee increase before as the other programs did. With the last fee increase, they had a 20%.
That's right. Okay. Thank you for reminding me.
Vice Chair Hazenkamp, you had something to add, and then Member Bauer.
Yeah, just a follow-up to this. Has there been any movement to have legislature fund some of this? Because obviously this is a revenue generation for Oregon. You know, the people putting the people to work from either the companies, the PIs. So obviously, you know, there's a lot of taxes that are being taken in for that. So has there been any movement or push to try and because obviously we need throughput to get people licensed to generate more revenue. You know, it's one of the biggest booming businesses out there, at least on the security side. And I know PI is obviously coming up with that as well, given the lack of law enforcement and ability to do some investigations. So has there been any push or, you know, along the lines of these cost increases to, you know, push over these fees to, you know, I mean, I don't know if we can actually sub out or do you know, find somebody cheaper than the AG's office, because they're not exactly the cheapest. I know it's probably state law, but has there been any movement on any of those avenues to try and push through legislature to make some changes to get some funding through? You know, I know everybody's fighting for dollars, but you know, there could be a direct correlation to the amount of, you know, investigators and security officers in the state that bring business into the state, especially with the reduction in law enforcement.
So we did start communications with the LFO and CFO because there are more fee-based programs than I was aware of within the state of Oregon, and they're all about in the same position that we are in today. And so we started having those conversations, but I don't know if I'd call it a pushback from them, but would you be able to speak to that at all, Joanna?
I think, like you mentioned, the whole state is hurting right now as far as our other revenue source for our agency, crime fees. See, it's hurting too. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it would be an option to try to get any of that.
Mm-hmm.
And Jennifer Howell for the record, the LFO is the legislative fiscal officer and the CFO is the chief financial officer. So LFO represents the legislature and CFO represents DAS, the Department of Administrative Services, which oversees all of the budgeting process for each individual agency. And then to your question about legal services, no, the state of Oregon state agencies are required to use the Department of Justice for our legal representation.
And Captain Calpine, again for the record, in talking and brainstorming, we actually come to you with a sense of urgency, because as projected, we're about $500,000 shortfall that DPSST would have to pony up without any remedy, basically borrow from them. And on that side, we have their own issues. What we know that we need to do is do a deeper dive in what else can we look at. But right now, we have to do something pretty immediate, which is coming to you asking for this fee increases to get us out of the negative. But we also know that we need to look at other sustainable issues. And we talked about, does that look like a work group to get people involved to sit there and go, what other ways can we do this, and simply continue to raise costs that we might be able to. So our commitment is to review this in a deeper one, especially in the 25-27, to come up with better recommendations. But for now, and it's even, we feel a little bit behind the 8 ball, making it a February 1st ask is to again get us out of those projected negatives that we've been dealing with business services on how we're trending. So no, we have not looked at long-term solutions, but we do need to do that. We don't have the time right now to be able to take the potential months to look for other solutions, or even the impact. What happens if we have to reduce personnel, what doesn't get done in this program, which is not what we're advocating, because as you said, you want to know what we're comparable to other agencies. We just started looking at that, and we know right now it's currently is we're much smaller than some other states that handle this. So, we know there's more work to do, but for now we're just dealing with the emergence that we're faced with right now.
Member Bauer, would you still like to share?
Yeah. Ben Bauer for the record. So yeah, I just want to echo that sentiment that I think going forward, if you can get more money from the legislature is probably going to be the play, because by your own admission, a lot of private security, and I think we're going to counter this with all three programs, we're a small business, okay? And so Oregon is already a really tough state to be a small business in, okay? I pay 35% to taxes alone. That's not even including certifications. So yeah, everyone's vying for dollars in the government, but there's a lot more government dollars to go around than what's going around in small business. And I get the sense of urgency. I think I would be more willing to sign off on a temporary solution than a permanent one, because at this committee before, we've been told, hey, this is a rush, let's do this, and we'll figure out the details later with the subcommittee, and then the subcommittee never materializes. So I'm a little bit hesitant to sign off on something that is going to end up being permanent, with the intent was always to come back and revisit it, because I feel like none of us out here have extra money to give out. And so I think that looking at the legislature is going to be a more worthwhile solution than looking at small business right now.
Member Nakasone, you're up next.
Nakasone, unarmed for the record. I think Ben very eloquently described the problem there. I won't rehash anything, but I will 100% support that, as I'm in favor of a temporary solution. I'm concerned across all three programs with a number of things. One, the heftiness of the amounts across all of them, and the speed at which it came up. And agreeing with the need for a deeper dive, I do have three things that I want to put out there as potential routes towards fixes. One being to move as much of the application process electronically online to reduce data entry and that sort of work. Two, to run a long-term economic projection at where we're going to be, 10, 20 years down the road, understanding that there's variables there, and possibly implementing a smaller year-over-year percentage increase so that we're not hitting the industry with these hefty increases of 20+% all at once. And then three, probably the most in-depth one, and I'd be more than willing to serve on any subcommittees or work groups to get this done, is in conjunction with completing the revision of the armed curriculum look at potentially creating endorsement certifications for specifics to the industry. Unarmed, I'm specifically thinking of taser, baton, pepper spray, and for armed, potentially, an endorsement for each additional firearm that you would want to carry, so that we're kind of basically almost creating an a la carte version of certifications. I think, and they don't have to be very expensive. I think those would be very cost effective. We have to run the math, but potentially even lowering the cost of the initial armed and unarmed certifications with more fees coming in from endorsements. Essentially, the constituent is buying the certifications that they need for the nature of the work they're doing and the tools that they're going to be utilizing, and those that don't need to do those types of things would not have to, purchase those additional endorsements. I think we have to remember that, unlike the rest of public safety, private security is definitely a for-profit industry. I don't think anyone's trying to get rich necessarily, but we have to do what's profitable for the industry in order to keep it moving along. And big part of that is it has to be an entry level, at least on the private security, a good portion of the constituents are going to be entry level employees. So increasing the length of training as well as the cost does become very prohibitive towards bringing new people into the industry. So there's my piece.
Member Schranz?
Samantha Schranz for the record. I understand that DPSST is an overarching department. I'm not quite sure how much of the DPSST funds are allotted to law enforcement training. However, when I did go to the police academy, I was making wage and getting OT while I was there doing my training. I'm not sure how it works, right? This was back in 2015. But I'm curious if there could be some sort of additional income from that side of things, because as far as I'm aware, police are getting PERS, they're getting insurance, they're getting wage, they're getting OT. I don't know that it's a horrible idea to have them invest in themselves and their training, the same way that we have to invest in ourselves in our training. And yeah, because for our training, we're not getting paid hourly wage, and they have hours, they have jobs. We are all, most of us are on like private contract situations. And so not a lot of our hours are as consistent as like police work hours. And so I'm not sure if anything can be done with that, but that might be another way to drum up some revenue.
Member Berg?
Ken Berg, manufacturing industry for the record. I just want to echo the past three statements by Member Bauer, Member Nakasone. Sorry if I butchered your name there, Nate. And also Member Schranz. I think they hit the nail right on the head. And I understand that currently we're talking about the private investigator section and not the private security side. Although I think this is universal for all the disciplines. First and foremost, I am not a mathematician, but just some basic math at an armed and unarmed security officer position. With these increased fees coupled with the instructor fees for both armed and unarmed, an armed private security officer would have to literally work 3 days at minimum wage, $13.70, in order to meet this increase in fees. So just more of a comment than a question.
Vice Chair Hazenkamp?
Yeah, Vice Chair Hazenkamp. Since I know we're really, right now focused on private investigators, but I can say this, looking at all the increases across the board, I guess my question is, regarding the fees as it is right now with PI work, why is it so? Is it that much more work to certify a PI versus private security, unarmed versus armed? Is there a work level, or is it just, did that have to do with attorney fees in the past? I'm just trying to understand, the difference we're paying in an unarmed and armed license versus PI licensing, because I know the numbers, we're talking 450 PIs, and I think I'm not sure what currently licensed we have, and I'm sure we'll get into that, of unarmed and armed security officers. But what are we looking at currently for the breakdown in work that takes to maintain the PI program versus the private security program?
Jennifer Howell for the record. I'll start with an answer and then others may add to it. So a large part of how it is factored is the fact that there are so many fewer PIs to spread that cost across. So if we're saying that we generally have 700 to 800 active private investigators licensed at any given time, we have how many private security individuals in the thousands, right? 15, 20,000? Yes. So we have a greater pool of individuals to spread those costs across. That's why it comes off as a higher increase in private investigators' fees, because there are fewer applicants to share that cost burden.
Okay, and I guess so my question is, why do we not consider them, if the work to certify a PI and all that is not much different than the work to certify, I know there's, reviewing PI, we're reviewing their, CV, their hours and all that. But if the number of the personnel hours to process, renew, and everything like that, if it's not much different, why do we take and spread the, obviously, from being certified on the PI side as well, why do we take that work and just disperse it amongst the current PIs versus as a program whole, so that, when we look at the revenue generated by security companies versus PI companies, I mean, I think that they're also very, not very, I guess don't have an equal, the security side is probably bringing way more in revenue than the PI side. So I guess I'm just curious is, why do we not look at it as a whole? And, I would even be, as far as, offering some things, I would see that, I would rather see a higher increase in entity licensing. And then, maybe a slight change in private security, but, but holding the PIs harmless. And I say that because I would actually like to see the companies that are not paying for relicensing of their employees, that does come directly out of the employees. I think that, looking at what some of the security companies are bringing in, and I would especially even like to see maybe adding an increased fee for companies that are not registered in Oregon. Some of the big ones, I just think that I would like to see them, potentially, just as hey, if you're going to come into Oregon and do business, you're probably not paying a lot of, again, they're probably paying some income tax, but in general, that money's not coming back to Oregon. So looking at increasing the entity licensing and maybe even adding another tier for companies that are not registered in Oregon as their home, or it's just not their main corporation location because they're trying to avoid, for whatever reason, they're all these multinational companies that are just they come into Oregon to take the business. And again, it does also take away from Oregon-based businesses. But and seeing an increase in the entity fees versus putting it down on the individual security officers and even the individual PIs. I think that there's been a big push for the businesses to put it back onto the employees, and I'd really like to see, because there are some very good profits going on in the private security side right now. It's set to be in the increase majority of the time. Maybe, again, and I hate to say this, but there's some folks that probably, if they can't afford the entity license, it probably shouldn't be providing security services. So I think that's something that I would rather see us focus on, increasing the entity license more, because that is taking a lot more time and effort, I would believe, and there is less security companies bearing. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. I think that looking at the entity license is just the way to go. There is more work in trying to get those through and going through all the paperwork. And I think that it would also discourage some of the folks who, well, I'll just throw it in because it's not that much money. If you look at the cost, for their license versus what a private security is doing, what a private investigator is doing, by and large, I think that these security companies are bringing way more income, and I think that they should be looking at that as kind of paying their fair share, because ultimately it's not the licensee that is, other than their wages, they're not bringing in the income like the entities are. So that would be my push, is to take. I know we try to do it across the board and for everything, and I think that, hey, you know what? Look at the late fees were not touched. I would rather see if people are not on time. I think there should be a bigger penalty for not getting your stuff renewed on time. So I would rather see a rework of that to have a bulk of this taken up by the private security entity license, and obviously that's going to affect me personally quite a bit. And then look at holding the PIs themselves harmless. But I do think that the PIs should maybe they should look at if they're not working on their own, they maybe should be looking at something in the entity realm there as well for some of the bigger PI companies and things like that to make sure that everything's being done right as well. So again, that would be my 2 cents on it. My input is that we look at increasing entity licensing more, try to hold the security licensing as close to what we can, and then look at holding the PIs, just given the number of them. Really it's an expensive license right now. It's an expensive renewal, and so I'd really like to see that not go up, for just the type of work that they're doing. Anyway, thank you for letting me talk for a second.
Chair Lanzin, for the record. Jeremy, thank you. Those are good thoughts. We just went through the entity licensing process. Just off the top of anybody's head there on staff, how many out-of-state entities did we find?
Susie Herring, I wouldn't be able to give that number at this time, Dan, without doing further research.
Okay, so I'm just kind of going through and dissecting some of what Jeremy's talking about. Rule says that we can, adjust our entity licensing, at any time, and I'm not opposed to that for the rationale that you're bringing up as well. But I'm also, concerned that we've, got a timing thing that we need to get on here, and so just for our edification, what was our timeline on this? Somebody notified DPSST something's going to happen, and then we have to now move forward and bring this to the board for recommendation to raise fees, and then in between we analyzed how much we were going to increase. So 1, when did we get notified? 2, and I think we just did a percentage increase, and 3, I'm going to talk about the board thing after that. Those 2 questions were answered.
About when we first figured out we were in a problem, it occurred when the pay equity increase hit and we noticed our personnel costs jumped too high to be sustainable. So that went into effect June 1st.
And then the percentage that we're increasing proposed is what?
For investigators, 25%.
25, is that 25% across the board for all of the disciplines here?
For the record, it's on, there's a 20% increase with the private security group, but there's some increases there for instructor, armed professional, firearms. So it's not a specific amount, not a standard 20% increase across the board. It's different for the licensure or certification based upon the work that is done into that, whether it's processing staff, compliance staff, our learning and development specialists.
Okay, so Chair Lanzin again, for the record. So 2A, that's my point, is in this topic that we're talking about. Are we in a timeline where we can potentially raise our entity licensing? Maybe something else on the private security side, so that investigators have less of an impact.
Jennifer Howell, for the record, haven't been able to add this to the record yet. But with those questions and comments about can one be leveraged to balance the others, and I would say no, because we are legislatively restricted to only charge a fee that covers the cost of said program. So DPSST can only charge an investigator a fee that covers the cost of administering the investigator license and the compliance with that. The same is the legislative language for the private security providers, so those individuals holding certification and licensure. And then again, there's a separate statutory legislative requirement for the entities. And within each of those, where it grants the authority to collect a fee to cover the cost of the program, it also restricts it to that program. So they are individual accounting buckets of money.
I apologize, Vice Chair Hazenkamp. So I'm trying to understand that comment there. If they're housed, are we sharing personnel and personnel costs? Is this, what are the silos that are, cover the private investigator? If it's, if we're sharing a lot of personnel, I guess I can't understand why, what is the difference in the evaluation or the management of the program, and why is it not looked at as a program as a whole versus the individual silos for all of these? And is that just have to do with the OARs and the ORSs, or?
So back on the LAB, the spreadsheet that we had up earlier, we have each program specifically tagged out, and we also have staff that's associated with those programs. So we do have. Sorry, go ahead.
Do those staff stay in their silos, or do they? Because it seems like when it comes to PI work, I've gotten emails from both and things like that. So I'm assuming that the staff are not just going, oh, it's only PI work, it's only in my lane, or are they sharing work because that's what is the most prudent and whatnot for efficiency?
It depends on the program. So for example, like the private security entity program, we were given 3 positions with that program. And so we have designated staff. Because the work is pretty heavy right there, we don't have the ability to have anybody else do any work right now to help out if need be. And then when we took on Oregon Board of Investigators, OBI, I was like, what is that? In 2005, we were given 2 positions at that time. And then the rest of the staff is categorized for private security. But as I mentioned, like using Steve as an example, his salary is paid out of private security fees, but he would be doing something for investigators, such as ethics, continuing education. And so there's a little bit of kind of give and take with some of those moves on who might be helping with something.
Okay, well, I guess in trying to understand, how can we, is there a way to, again, I do think that, yes, you have less individuals, but we're putting a larger burden on them financially. And, how can we, is there anything that we can move or, in the program, move over to the private security or even to the entity licensing? Because like I said, I and to Chair Lenzen's, question is, can we increase entity? And really, I see it as detrimental to have these all in these 3 different silos and not just look at the program as a whole. And, when we're talking about individuals versus businesses, having, the unfortunately, the businesses who are, profiting. Obviously some people are just working in the industry, but to support the licensing, because they're ultimately the ones that don't continue to bring in income if they're not able to get people licensed and get those personnel in there. So is there any way quickly to move that, or is there any way to change the entity licensing costs more than the other silos?
Well, Susie Herring for the record, the entities were actually hurting the most. And we were given 3 positions with that, but we actually moved one of the positions out of there to help that deficit that they've run out of money in November. So
Who did the entity program did?
Yeah.
So, but yet we're not increasing their fees more. So is it the money being run out is dealing mostly with the entity program? I mean, if we look at the budget shortfall, is it just across the board because of the personnel costs, or, they're out of money. So is that affecting the licensing of the personnel and the PIs?
No, Susie Herring for the record. There are 2 specific positions that are assigned to the private security entities. Their salaries only considered for the program. I think you asked another question there that I'm missing. Oh, and about their fee increase, it is a 50% fee increase for the entities.
Okay, so then I was trying to, we're just trying to absorb the personnel costs and the cost of doing business. And so,
We can proceed to Member Bauer. He's had his hand raised for a long time.
Yeah, thank you, Ben Bauer, for the record. I just did want to echo some of that sentiment. As an instructor, I have noticed a huge influx of companies coming into Oregon and entering the Oregon market that are not actually based here. So there might be an opportunity there to have a out-of-state fee or something like that. Something else to consider too, I don't know how feasible this is, and I'm not a licensed investigator, but I know on the law enforcement side, what a patrol officer does and what a detective does is fairly similar. So I don't know if there would be a way to roll in, kind of piggybacking off what Nate suggested, having like one basic certification that everyone starts with that maybe covers some law, legal, ethics, that kind of thing. And then you get additional endorsements. And one of those endorsements could be private investigator, so that it is more rolled into private security rather than being its own program, since it doesn't seem to have as many folks. So that way there could be maybe some shared staff time there as well. And although I do understand where he's coming from, raising the entity licensing thing, speaking to the industry, the entity licensing has been a tough pill to swallow for many people. And being asked to pay even more for something that we didn't want in the first place is not going to go over very well, I don't think. So I just wanted to add that to the discussion.
Member Nakasone.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback both our vice chair and then Nakasone for the record, unarmed. Just want to piggyback off that. I didn't even think about the out-of-state factor. That's a great point for consideration until you brought that up. But also, additionally, in terms of what the entity does, if we do look at a route of various endorsements based on what the constituent is doing, we could also look at what the entity is doing and the type of service that they are providing and having endorsements for that. If they're going to issue handcuffs, if they're going to do things like citizens arrest, having endorsements for the entity on their side. I also want to echo what Ben said about it being a tough pill to swallow. And I don't think an increase of that magnitude, having just started the program last year, or this year actually, is going to go over very well at all. I do have a question separately, though, about the legal fees that were discussed earlier. I apologize if I missed it, but are those legal fees siloed out amongst the 3 programs as well, or are those blanketly absorbed, or how does that factor into the math?
Susie Heron, for the record, it's the same. It's broken out by, we call it PCA codes, but it's based on each program. So if we reach out to DOJ based upon an investigator, it gets billed to that program. If we reach out for an entity, it's billed to that program.
Chair Lenzen, for the record, I think we were on the PIs there for a while, and I don't think we've finished that conversation. Did we have more on that, Samantha?
I think I said everything that I wanted to say. Oh, Samantha, for the record, Samantha Strauss.
Okay. So I got a question for staff. What happens if we say no?
We'll still take the department's recommendation to the board next week.
Okay, so it's up to the board to decide this. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, the policy committees are body.
Okay, so we can say no, and it's up to the board to say what the board wants to do.
Helena
Is
Snyder,
that-
we can also make minor changes, correct? Or recommendations as we've discussed as far as being a temporary fix and or possibly the amount, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, Chair Lenzen here. 50 minutes to go until we're done with this meeting. And then we have to have two action items that we need to deal with. I think we were basically on action item 1, and then we still have an action item 2. I need to look at these. By discussion and consensus, approve or amend the fiscal impact statement. That was one of them, and by a motion or vote, approve the recommended fee increases and rule changes for the private security provider certification and licensure program. So all of this has to be done within 50 minutes, and if we're going to make any recommendations for modifications, that needs to be sussed out like immediately. And then given the knowledge that the board is making the final decision, we are we are a group that can make a recommendation that can be no, but the board can say yes. We need to just understand those things. So there might be in like in all things politics, we may need to come to some middle ground on this if we are in the no category. So here we are. I'm just thinking out loud, and help me because y'all are on the on this policy group, and you're all very knowledgeable and very people.
Ben Bauer for the record. This is twice now where this committee has been forced to make really groundbreaking and widespread decisions on a very tight time budget. If we were aware that this was an issue in June, why didn't we start this process earlier with adequate time to discuss it before we were up against the deadline? Because it's hard, because I want you guys to be funded. I mean, I've worked with many of you and I know you by first name, many of you, and you guys are good people. But also I have a responsibility to the industry. So it's a really sucky position to be put in, because I don't feel like there's a winning solution here, because there's not really enough time to come up with a better solution. So I just, like, in the future, if we had more time to kind of suss out some of these issues, especially the big widespread ones, I think it'll be better for everybody.
Ken Berg, manufacturing industry, for the record. I wholeheartedly second that.
Nakasone, unarmed, for the record. I wholeheartedly third that.
Catherine McAlpine for the record. You know, I'm gonna own some of this as far as notification, right? Because as we said, we started the pay equity in June, and we started seeing the trends and the calculations. So you're talking over a 4-month span. We have to do our internal review. Is there anything we can do internally before we come here? So what I'm hearing is, while it may have taken us 4 months, of course, we're waiting. We didn't do an emergency. 3 to 4 months, we're coming to the next board committee meeting. I hear what you're saying, and again, we're asking for a quick timeline as far as implementing this. So all your concerns are noted, but like I said, we also felt like we were under the gun, that this was all of a sudden a decline, a rapid decline, and how are we going to get ourselves out of this? And like I said, there were many multiple meetings with business services on what we could do, if anything, and this is where we've now landed, because as I said, doing nothing, as we would tell the board, is a $500,000 shortfall. And my understanding, and please, I have experts here, is what I'm told is the first impact will come out of DPSST's pocket, and I can tell you, we're also trending in the negative there. So, long and short of, I'm told it's unacceptable to be in the negative. So we're coming with the concerns as we, learned about them in the last 3 months, and then we did not do an emergency meeting. We came knowing this was scheduled and coming to you, and we were still having conversations with the LFO and CFO on what is the proper way of doing this. So again, as a new professional standards director, I will take your comments and heed to them, but this is what we knew at the time, and in consulting with many of our experts.
Member Berg.
So Ken Berg from manufacturing industry for the record. So from what it sounds like where we're currently at, we have three options. We can either approve it as is or deny it, which ultimately will go to the board regardless of whatever our decision is for final disposition. Or we can make a recommendation. So from our hour-and-a-half long conversation regarding this, it sounds like we have two potential recommendations. And so Chairman Lenzen, I don't know if this is where you might want to take over, but we have either one, approve this on a temporary basis and set a deadline where it will be reevaluated, or option two, from what it sounds like, is find that middle ground and alter the increase where everybody's okay with that. Those are the two recommendations that I've heard come from this. So I don't know if we need to vote on which of the three options we want to choose at this point in time. I don't know the best way to handle it at that point.
Chair Lenzen, for the record, I hear you, Ken. Yeah, those, in any case, yeah, that's, well, let me back up the timing on this. It's about three or so months. Staff did a deep dive. They presented to us today something that they evaluated over a period of time, and they said, okay, well, what can we do? I know department manager Herring is that right? Is that department manager?
Sure, program manager.
Program manager. Okay. I know conversations that we've had is, they're counting paper clips. They're doing everything they possibly can. So I know that they're being tight, and I appreciate the efforts to bring forward something that's been evaluated in a pretty thorough manner, and it looks like we've got some really good professionals on staff. So at this point, I think we have some recommendations that are pretty solid and sussed out. So I think we've got we do have a couple of those options if you guys want to. If y'all want to look at those, and that is a conversation we can have, understanding that we're done at 3:30 here. Is there any other options besides what Board Member Berg presented that you guys can see?
Well, Chair, if I could make a motion, if that's acceptable.
Sure.
This is Helena Snyder for the record, and I make a motion to amend the fiscal impact statement and set, as was discussed before, a deadline for this to be temporary, and the fee for the private investigator licensing to go back to what we were originally presented at $660 and not the $690.
Okay, there's a recommendation on the floor. So, all right. So we're looking at, for conversation purposes here, Chair Lindsay. Now, you're suggesting that we look at not raising our entity licensing. Is that correct?
No, it's PI.
Yeah, Jennifer Howell for the record. At this time, we're only discussing the private investigator action items.
Yeah. Got it.
So, and then, should I add to the record for the conversation, the difference between the 660 and the 690 and when we would run out of?
Yep.
Okay, sure. So because we haven't been able to add this to your conversation yet. So with your motion, so no fee increase at this time, and the private investigator revenue and expenditure would go into the negative March of 2026. At $660, it goes into the negative in April 2027. The 690 would carry the program through September 2027.
Chair Lindsay for the record. So what you just presented, is that if we do nothing,
if
we're good until 27. I mean, if we raised it and that we call it good, then we're good until 27, and then we got to do something else in 27. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah. So the fee increases that the department is recommending now are, the goal is to carry us through what we're currently in, the remainder of the 23-25 biennium, and carry the current service level, paying for the staff that currently exist and the costs of the programs through the 25-27 biennium. So this current cycle and the next 2-year cycle. And going forward, every time we are preparing a budget, we're going to have to be reanalyzing the program fees every 2 years. To ensure that the fees are keeping up with the program. So both programs, the private security program and the private investigator program, went through very, very long stretches before they received any increases. And we didn't do any increases last time for private investigator. So it's having those past periods where we didn't have any increases are really starting to catch up to us now.
So Vice Chair Hazencamp, real quick, apologize. I just want to confirm, so there is, if we wanted to just maintain the program whole through 25, that's which amount? Through the end of this biennium, I should say, because that would give us a year and a half to look at something for the 25-27 biennium.
The motion amount for $660 would carry the program to April 2027 of the 25-27 biennium. So it would fall short before before that ends in 2027. So we would be continuing to analyze the trends and coming back as needed.
Member Nakasone, do you have anything to add?
I just wanted to point out, if we're talking about temporary solutions, if we're looking at any kind of temporary increase, this could, this meeting being public record and streamed and everything, this could inadvertently create the effect of constituents waiting to get certifications, which could create a ripple effect in the complete opposite direction of the destination we're trying to get to here. So I just want to make sure everyone's tracking on that in terms of anything we do temporarily.
Vice Chair, I don't see that as being an issue. If they're going to need to work, they're going to need to work now. So they can't work without the licensing. So I think that that's not necessarily something that we should take into effect. Chair Lindsay, I would like to make a motion that we, whatever fee increases that we do, and I know we already had a motion on the table, but I just want to bring this one up, is that we only look at fee increases for the remainder of the 23-25 biennium, and that we continue to monitor, because obviously we're looking at some of the other, you know, I don't know, again, can't be figured out how much legal expenses we have, but I would like to say that we look at temporary increases to take us through the remainder of the 23-25 biennium, with looking at it and implementing, you know, should there be a rate increase every biennium. So that would be my recommendation, if we could, you know, come up with some sort of motion that would combine what the last motion was. But I would be for a one that just carries us through the 25 biennium with constant work on looking at what we need to do for 25-27 biennium.
Joanna,
All right, yeah.
I just want to say quickly that we're working in advance. We're already past building the budget for the 25-27, so it would be too late to make any changes preemptively for that biennium. That's why we're kind of thinking about making the fee increase to go through the end of that biennium, the next biennium. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but I'm also wondering if we can't look at other funding mechanisms and go to legislature for funding of this nature for some of these things that are being mandated by legislature versus putting it all on the private industry to fund. So, and I guess I just want to also reiterate, it didn't matter what we vote on this will be put forward to the board in the manner, in fact, in the manner it is currently, and the scope of what is currently being put forward is going to be put forward to the board for vote, no matter what we come up with.
Right, the
If we
department's
make a modification, then Chair Lindsay, I think if we make a modification or recommendation, that can be advanced as well.
right. Jennifer Howell to confirm the department's recommendations and the private security policy recommendations will both be presented to the board.
And Ben Bauer, for the record, I would say that any temporary solution that we make needs to have some strong stipulation on there that a legislative funding solution needs to be explored, because this is going to be a continued issue. And unless the economy just becomes amazing and small business explodes, it's going to continue to be a problem. So there needs to be a major impetus to explore that as an option. Otherwise, it's continued to be a problem for all three of these programs.
That sounds like it's a director's situation, huh? Chair, Director. That was just a side comment. So we do have a motion on the floor, and then we've got Vice Chair made a recommendation as well. So for you all, I mean, I can drive us, but I want to make sure that everybody's getting heard as well. Of course, with the 35 minutes that we have left. So can we reiterate what their recommendation or motion was? And we've had conversation.
Would that be me, I guess, Helena, for the record?
Yeah.
With some assistance from the committee, I would still make a recommendation to amend the fiscal impact statement in the sense of putting some temporary language as far as this fee increase is concerned. And therefore we can leave the dollar amount as was recommended when we came into this meeting at the 690, but I just want to be sure that it's temporary so we can all have the opportunity to look at other ways to address the funding.
Chair Lindsay, so for the conversation with this, staff, if we recommend a temporary situation, is that realistic? I mean, can we come back and say, all right, well, we can lower it later?
Susie Herring for the record. I mean, we have seen in the past where we have increased fees and decreased fees. That has happened, but it really goes, whether or not it goes in line with the revenue and the expenditures that we're seeing with each specific program. I don't really know much about something implementing a fee increase for a temporary basis.
Yeah, because I'm trying to suss this out. I mean, does it really make much of a difference if we say, let's make a temporary recommendation and pass that.
Jennifer Howell, if I'm, so if, is the goal of stating that it needs to be temporary, is the goal for a commitment from the department to come back on a regular basis and report what the status of the fee and the effect and continuously evaluate the need for that fee amount?
This is Helena Stein for the record. I believe so, and I believe also from what we've heard from others as well, is to also potentially have work groups, and even Director McAlpine said, to look at, do a deeper dive into everything, and I think that's why there's been a lot of talk about being temporary. So that's, if I'm mistaken from anybody else, please speak up, but I believe that's the idea behind the temporary language.
Vice Chair Hazekamp for the record. I didn't catch the name on who had said that the current 25 to 27 budgeting is occurring currently, so that therefore if we only voted to have a temporary that would carry us through the 25 biennium, that would be too late. Who was that?
Joanna Wade, budget analyst. We're just
Okay, Joanna.
Next biennium's budget already. The governor's office.
Okay, and the governor's offices. Okay. So when is what is staff moving forward to, and that's any different in the budget currently for the 25-27 biennium? What are they looking at currently to change and add in the 25-27 budget that would, where, clearly there's some shortfall coming here, if we don't approve this increase, or if it doesn't get approved, in April, I think it was April of 27. So that carries all the way through. So what is staff planning for in the 25-27 budget that we could not come back and determine if we need to keep these fee increases going into the 25-27 budget?
Not sure I understand the question. We're building the budget for next biennium based on our current service level with expected inflation.
Okay. And okay, I think I'm understanding now. I just know if there was, if we're just looking at the status quo, or if there's additional look at in the 25-27 budget for personnel services or anything like that.
No.
Other than inflation and pay increases.
Just current service levels, but state level inflation for personal services and services and supplies.
And Jennifer, I would add that these fee increases are intended to carry that weight. So we know we have the impact now. We also know that we have the impact in 25-27. So these fee increases are aimed at bridging that gap between what we have and what we will need at that time.
And Kathy McAlpine for the record, and what we did not, why we projected out, because we did not want to nickel and dime and keep, every time there was a COLA increase or personnel, we're coming here. So if we can do the projections, so I think to the question on the table is, if the projections don't become true, will there, that's when we could look at if all of a sudden inflation wasn't what it was and the, increases didn't happen, could it sustain us? For example, the hypothetical is right now, if the motion on the floor was 660 instead of the 690, it goes to April 2027. If all those increases don't hit the max that they projected, it could carry us through the remainder of that 27 and we would be just fine. But again, that's why we have the experts to do those projections so that we aren't faced with the shortfalls that we now are facing in this current budget cycle.
Member Berg, would you like to add something?
Yeah, just more of a statement to piggyback off of what we've already talked about regarding temporary language. Just again, a statement that if we don't add an expiration date, it basically becomes permanent.
Chair Lenz, I think you had Stone had his hand raised.
Go for it.
Hey, I'm gonna make a motion to take a vote on the original increase. And if it doesn't pass, then, they can take it in front of the board and at least the board will know that we voted. But I think we owe, as our positions, I think we owe at least a vote, of an up and down vote. And then if that fails, we can take another vote on the same language with a expiration date. How do y'all feel about making a motion to do that?
Well, Chair Lenz in here, I think we need to give Helena her due here. She does have a motion on the floor.
Yeah.
And Helena, are you interested in modifying your motion, entertaining that?
I thought I had when I said to go back to the original 690, but have the temporary language.
Helena, could I offer a potential modification to that? See if you're okay with it. I think that, we go with the motion with the understanding that we're going to evaluate in the beginning of the 25 biennium to see if projections are still holding true for what we had, and it can determine at that time if they can return back to the original or if we need to continue it through the rest of the 25-27 biennium.
Helena, your thoughts on that?
That's a hard one. They go through I know what budgeting is like, and so I can only imagine trying to, yeah.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is if the budget amount is not used, obviously it's going to be there. So we get into, if we get through this biennium and there's a surplus, or they're not using as much in legal fees as they thought, then obviously they wouldn't need as much in the 25-27 biennium. Correct me if I'm wrong, staff. And so therefore we could look at, we don't need to bring in any more money. Again, I'm not sure if this carries over in this program, unlike, traditional bienniums, but I'm just saying that we go through it looking like we're going to go through the April 27, but we're still constantly, we're evaluating it at the beginning of the biennium. If it still looks like we need it, it stays in place. But then at, April 26, we're looking at it again. We're still on track. We can go back to the original. And then obviously, if just like what staff said, is they may not need as much money as they budgeted for if the things don't hold true. And so that would temper both the temporary, the people that want the temporary, but it would also give us the money going forward should everything continue on the same, on the way it's going. But at least it gives us a look at it to determine should we have a vote done to return to the original fees because there's enough money there. The sky hasn't fallen. We haven't had all these legal fees that we've been having.
Yeah. So we're not going to have time to finish private security the way we're going. So at this point, we have a department recommendation that PSIPC approve the fee increase and the proposed rule changes for the OAR, and the fee increases for the PI licensure program are necessary to ensure the program, as we have read here, and by discussion and consensus approve or amend the fiscal impact statement. So do we want to, I'm going to say let's have a vote on, let's see, I want to make sure that Helena is heard and that that recommendation motion is not forgotten, and that's important to me that everybody gets their voice within the time frame that we have here. So do I hear a modification to that recommendation from the department for a vote?
Jennifer Howell, for the record, may I? Chair
You're good
Lindsay?
at it. Yeah, you're good at it.
On the discussion and consensus with the fiscal impact statements, I do want to note that your conversations and the comments about how the fee increase will impact the small businesses the ability to pay for continuing education, bills, insurance, those types of things, how an increase in the license amount will also impact those costs for small businesses. So I wanted to make sure that you knew that I would be able to add those statements to the fiscal impact statements. Adding the temporary component, I don't know how to do that to the fiscal impact statement. But the department every even numbered year has to build a budget for the next biennial cycle. Could DPSST, through the policy committee's recommendation, the policy committee recommend that DPSST report back at that time that we're building the budget, what is happening with the fees as part of that temporary and that reevaluation process. So where in the past, we've never really come back at each interim to tell you what's happening with the budget. We build the budget. Now that we're talking about these fees, the agency could then build that into the process as we're building in 26, the 27, 29 budget, coming back and saying this is the evaluation of what the fees are doing.
Helena, does that work? And committee, does that work?
Helena, for the record, I think that's a great idea.
Okay, so those will be on the record for further conversations, and Jennifer Held can advance those. So at this point, it looks like we're calling for a vote on the department recommendations as is. Am I correct?
So that would, for the clarification of the record, is that for the 690? Okay, so the vote would be on the $600.90 license fee, the $35 late fee, and the rule changes for the private investigator licensure program.
Okay, so we have a department recommendation. We need a motion for that.
I'd like to make a motion.
Go for it.
To do as suggested.
Okay, do I have a second?
Catherine McAlpine, for the record, we actually do have a motion on the table with Helena, so even though I think we clarified it through Jennifer on what Helena was saying, so I think it's still her motion, and we just need a second.
Okay, Alex, you want to make that a second?
Yeah, I'll second the motion to advance the first license, the 690, with the expiration date.
All right, one call for a vote.
Chair Lindsay.
Aye.
Vice Chair Hastenkamp.
Aye.
Member Berg.
Aye.
Member Bauer.
Yes.
Member Herrera.
Yes.
Member Nakasone.
Yes.
Member Schwantz.
Nay.
Member Schultz.
Aye.
Member Snyder.
Aye.
Member Stone.
No.
Motion carried.
All right. So we have action 1, action 2. Am I reading that correctly?
Chair Lindsay and Jennifer Howell, for the record, I believe that we already did it because 1 was by discussion and consensus, and we had the discussion on the fiscal impact statements and the additions based on the conversations. And then it was the motion to accept the motion to move forward with the fee increases and the rule changes. So I think we're on the record for that one.
Okay, that's for PI. Now we have private security, 20 minutes.
Thank you, Jennifer Howell, for the record. Proposed rule changes for Oregon Administrative Rule OAR 25906000500, agenda item number 4. Briefly, most of all of the previous introduction applies. trying to see how to shorten this. Let's get right into the fees for private security provider certification and licensure. Again, those are affected by the increased cost this biennium for personnel services and cost for legal services. The department recommends that the private security provider certification and license fees be increased by a minimum of 20%. The fee changes for each certificate and license type are shown in the proposed rule changes that are found on page 3 and 4. They also appear in a table format on page 5 and 6. There are specific certifications and licenses that have a higher increase based on the costs that are unique to that certification or license, and I just wanted to highlight those. The Armed Private Security Professional certification will be increased to $110. The increase here reflects the additional workload for tracking and ensuring compliance with the annual firearms qualification and training requirements. The Armed Upgrade fee is increased to $45. Again, you have the increase that's reflective of the workload for tracking and ensuring compliance with the firearms qualification and training requirements. But in addition to that, the change from an unarmed professional to an armed professional also requires additional review of the applicant's criminal history for disqualifiers that are specific to the armed professional certification. The firearms instructor certification will be increased to $153, in part reflecting the workload for tracking and ensuring compliance with annual firearms qualification requirements, but also reflecting the workload considerations for the certified instructor audits and compliance. There's a separate fee for the private security firearms instructor course, and this fee will be increased to $250. That fee increase is necessary to cover the cost for use of the Academy training firearms range and firearms instructors. A new fee of $25 is added to reinstate an armed private security professional certification or a private security firearms certification after it has been emergency suspended. This addresses the costs that are related to issuing notices for emergency suspension orders and the postage for certified delivery of the notices. The unarmed instructor certification will be increased to $312. The increase here is impacted by the length and delivery of the unarmed instructor development course, the instructor audits, and compliance. And then as well, each individual certification or license will require the application fee. So you'd no longer be able to get, I guess what was previously referred to as a bundle with a manager and an individual professional license. Again, we've already talked about some of the fiscal impacts from earlier in the meeting. And we do recognize that any fee change has a fiscal impact on private security providers and applicants and this agency, and that many of the private security providers are part of small businesses. I think that's enough overview and any of your questions, and then of course your action items that are at the end of the memo.
All right, Chair Lenson here. Do we want to amend any of the fiscal impact statements?
Vice Chair Hazenkamp, I would make a recommendation that we just make the same adjustment that we did with the PI one, and then call it to a vote.
Hearing no other conversation with that, then we can move forward.
You got a couple of hands up.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't see. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
My bad.
Nakasone, unarmed for the record. Did I miss it, or what was the additional workload for tracking for the unarmed instructor going so high? It looked like that's a pretty significant increase.
Yeah, sure. The unarmed instructor certification requires new applicants to go through a process of attending a 4-day course. And that has evolved over time, where we at one point were taxing one individual of teaching that course, and now we've involved Center for Policing Excellence here at the agency. And so some of their staff has been involved with providing some of that information to the attendees during that 4-day course. in conjunction with what Steve will be teaching. And then we have, which we'll probably see things change a little bit with the certified instructor demonstration. But as you recall, in the previous years, folks were required to come back to the 4-day course to do that, and COVID changed all of that. So now the instructors are recording themselves and submitting thumb drives or CDs to be reviewed, and we're doing that. And as far as providing feedback and coaching those instructors through those processes individually, and then the audit process, we've resurrected that and have started doing audits on instructors. So it's a lot more than what it used to be.
Nakasone, unarmed for the record. I would propose that that entire process needs to be reviewed, but specific to this increase, a near 200% increase is a pretty extreme amount for an individual instructor to go up in amount.
Yeah, Ben Bauer for the record. Since certifications don't stack, if you're a small shop and you have the executive manager, you're an unarmed instructor, you're a firearms instructor, you got your entity and your provider licenses, you know, my spitball back in the napkin math says that I'll be owing every other year between $2,500 to $3,000 to DPSST between all those expenses. I mean, how can a small business support that kind of expenditure every other year? I just don't think that's reasonable.
I would agree with that, Ken Berg, for the record. Also, a lot of people in the industry only do this part-time.
I'll make a motion to accept the department fee increases with the same language that we did in regards to the evaluation process as we move through the biennium.
All right, we got a motion. Any other conversation? All right, let's, you got the motion. We can get a second on this.
I second that motion to update.
All right, call for vote.
Okay, regarding the proposed rule changes for OER 259-060-0500, fee increases for the private security provider certification and licensure program. Chair Lindsay.
Aye.
Chair Hazenkamp.
Aye.
Member Berg.
No.
Member Bauer.
No.
Member Herrera.
Yes.
Member Nakasone.
No.
Member Schranz.
No.
Member Schultz.
No.
Member Snyder.
Yes.
Member Stone.
Aye.
Motion. Yeah. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I got 6 and 4. So motion failed.
Alrighty then. What do we have left on this agenda?
Can I give some feedback real quick while you're thinking there, Dan?
Sure.
I do think the larger companies, I think Hazenkamp mentioned this earlier, you know, kind of a progressive rate. You know, they're really, really, really large companies like Securitas. You know, these companies are there's gonna be a lot more work involved dealing with their employees. And I hired an employee from Allied who was when we took over a contract, this is my friend's daughter. She was a quote unquote supervisor for Allied, right? And she never had a supervisory license. I just feel like that if you're a company and you have more than 200 or 250 employees, you should be paying a substantially higher amount of entity everything across the board should be much higher. And I mean really high, because I don't that's just my feedback for the future.
All right, message sent. Help me out here, staff. What do I got left on this agenda?
Item number 5 is an informational presentation of fee increases for the private security entity licensure program.
Go ahead.
Jennifer Howell for the record. This agenda item is presented for informational purposes where the board and the PSIPC establish fees for investigators and private security providers. Oregon Revised Statute grants the department the authority to establish fees for issuing licenses to the private security entities. As a refresher, the private security entity license is a new state licensing requirement that became effective January 1st, 2024. That was established through House Bill 2527 in the 2021 legislative session. The current entity license fee for a 1-year license is $624. All licenses expire on June 30th and then have to be renewed for the next year to continue operating lawfully. During the implementation of the new licensing requirement, applicants were because it went into effect in January, there was basically an initial 6-month licensing period followed by a renewal that would take you for the next year. So anyone who was applying had the option to either apply for that first 6 months at $312 or go ahead and apply for the initial and the renewal and combine the cost of the 6 months at $312, the annual at $624 for a total of $936, carrying them all the way through June 30th of 2025. When the private security entity license fee amount was calculated, DPSST estimated that there were approximately 1,000 entities that would meet the definition and require obtaining a license. And after 9 months of operation, we've determined that there are far fewer private security entities that require a license. Our current estimates reflect that there are around 500 to 600 entities. The decrease in the actual number of entities is a result of entities that may be exempt from the licensing requirements, entities that had multiple regional branches or multiple locations that were in our database multiple times, but ultimately only required a single entity license. There's been consolidation of entity businesses. There are some businesses that are already contracting with a licensed entity. And then there are also businesses that have stopped employing private security providers and providing private security services. As Susie mentioned, to help reduce the costs to the private security entity licensure program, DPSST transferred one of the 3 staff that it was approved for to a different program. However, it's the actual number of private security entities, which is half of the original estimate, that is the most significant factor in the program's revenue shortfall. The department is recommending that the private security entity license fee be increased to $936, and that's the annual cost. Again, it's a fiscal impact to businesses, and many of the businesses are small businesses. There's a potential, and it sounds strange because we're saying it's a cost, but it could be mitigated by the fact that entities have already paid this amount to be licensed through June of 2025. So it would be the same amount that they're then going to be assessed for the next year. And that is all written out in your memo. Try to abbreviate as much as possible for your time. Let's see. I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions if you have any, but there are no action items for you to vote on, but you're welcome to have questions or discussion. Thank you.
Berg, you're up first.
Ken Berg for the record. Thank you for the discussion on that. I have a quick question. I don't know if you have the answer at your fingertips or not. However, we talked about the decline in security entities ever since House Bill 2527 took effect. Do we by chance have any percentage of the businesses that closed down as a result of House Bill 2527?
Susie Herring for the record, I do not have that at my fingertips, no.
Sounded like that was one of the categories of the decrease. Is that correct, Jennifer?
It is, and in part why we wouldn't have that information is that we didn't have to track them before. So they didn't fall under any regulation. We wouldn't have had an accurate number of businesses to begin with. Is that, by your look, I'm incorrect in that statement?
Well, the way that, so we, at the time that we were processing applications before, yes, they didn't include entities, but as you all know, we assigned people an agency ID number and associated their employees with them. But just because they were entered into our system as an agency didn't mean that they technically fit the definition of needing an entity license. Because we could have them in the system and it states that they were contracting with another business. So there was a lot of things that Ben and Michael are actually still going through today, trying to determine which of those that are entered in the system are actively using private security providers.
All right, Chair Lynn's in here. Sounds like we might have tightened it up a little bit, which is kind of the intention there with 2527 as well. And then got Nate.
Nakasone, unarmed for the record. A couple of questions on the consolidation of entities and the entities that stopped. Do we know what the percentages of those that intentionally stopped because of this new program or intentionally consolidated? Those are pretty staggering. Going from 1,000 to 500 is a 50% reduction. I just want to gauge and bring to light the impact it actually had on the entire industry.
I don't have those percentages, no, Nate.
Okay, thank you.
All righty then. Can we get an agency update?
I know, it's like, wait, what? What's happening?
Well, Kathy McAlpine, for the record, I think you've just experienced it. Our agency update, we've been living and breathing this to try and be as well prepared and intentional to you. And that has taken a lot of our bandwidth, if I may be completely honest. I don't know, Susie, if you have anything further. It seems like it's been pretty all-consuming.
Yeah, just a few things. We have started doing entity compliance.
Yes.
We've been to quite a few different locations. Ben and Michael have actually been invited to attend and present information in regards to the entity license to get some, like, for example, school districts all in line, but we have had compliance teams go out this summer, and as we make contacts, we also will recognize who is in that location that maybe they can actually go ahead and stop in and have a face for DPSST and walk folks through those processes. It's been very successful with the one-on-ones that Michael and Ben have had. And then in addition, we have assessed fines for those that we have found out of compliance. So that team is moving towards the issuance of civil penalties for those that are out of compliance. So please note that's happening for those individuals. We do have a backlog of just less than a month now, and as you all were aware, it was about 4 months behind at one point, and staff has done a really good job of getting those applications caught up, and it's been fantastic. We've been updating the website. And then Coy Alexander, one of our curriculum or our technology development specialists, he actually has created a couple of videos that are helping those individuals that have questions about IRIS, what that looks like, how to function through it, what the things mean. Some people are confused at when they enter into IRIS and it says active. It's not an active certification or license. So it kind of walks them through how to read that, which is helpful, and for individuals that are looking at armed providers and what annual training is required and what to look for. We have some upcoming conversations as potentially the program may move to a different database or learning management system. So we're in conversations with a couple of different vendors right now, trying to see demos on that and what will work for not necessarily just our program, but the other regulatory programs within this agency as well.
Well, there we go. 331. Appreciate all of that. It looks like we're moving forward in a lot of things. And I do hear that we are looking, or there was a recommendation or thought that we try to do as much online. And it sounds like we're getting coy on that. So I appreciate that. Any other good of the order ideas, thoughts? Not hearing any. Our next regularly scheduled meeting is Tuesday, November 19th at 1:30.
Whoa, Ben Bauer, for the record, hold on. We didn't vote on entities, so what's the path forward with that?
Oh, thank you, Ben. Jennifer Howell here for the record. So the fees for the entity are established by the department through the legislative language for the Oregon Revised Statute, that the department may set those fees. So there's not a requirement for you all to vote on that one as an action item. But
Yeah,
we
excellent.
sure that
So,
we-
All right, thank you.
Vice Chair Hazenkamp, on that, can we make recommendation to the department that they look at those out of state non or foreign entity fees and or companies over 250 in the future? Just again, I've envisioned those entities take a lot more time to deal with, so that would just be my only recommendation for the department to look at that potentially. I think that pretty much everybody here was in agreement with that for the most part, even though we didn't take a vote.
Yeah, Ben Bauer, for the record, armed representative. I agree completely. If we made these fees more scaled to the size of the business, I think that they would be a lot easier to swallow for everyone all the way around. So I think if in general, across the board, we could change the fee schedule to be rather than one size fits all, it's proportioned to your business, I think that that could be a good solution.
Okay, staff, is that noted?
Yes, thank you. We've recorded the recommendation.
Okay. And this is all recorded too as well. So anything that we did recommend in this is also on record. So, all right. Anything else? You guys are amazing.
Yeah, Vice Chair Hazenkamp, I just want to thank staff for the hard work. I know you guys have been putting in. We really appreciate getting licensees through there and armed, and even holding some of this to make sure that we get into our research. So we really appreciate that. I have nothing but good things to say about staff there. So again, thank you very much.
Yeah, Ben Bauer, for the record, I want to piggyback on that. These meetings seem to be kind of adversarial, but in reality, you guys are super awesome. I contact you, it seems like every single week. Like I said, I'm on a first name basis with many of you. You guys are always a super useful resource and more than willing to help out. So I really, really appreciate that. You guys are doing good work and you're good people. So just wanted to let you know that I really do appreciate everything you guys do.
Agree.
Nakasone, for the record, I want to third that. We appreciate all of you. If you're counting paper clips, that is a problem that we want to be a part of the solution for just as much as everything we're talking about.
Kathy McAlpine, for the record, in closing, thank you very much for acknowledging the employees. And I will echo, I mean, we're literally counting how many copies we make. I've been impressed. I will give a shout out to Manager Herring, who has stressed about this. She feels your pain. We have looked at everything that we can before we came here. And it's not an easy thing to do. And so thank you for recognizing their work and their efforts. It is appreciated.
Wow, we could do this for another 20 minutes. Y'all are appreciated. I do. I'm going to pile on and say thank you. Appreciate that. And then to the committee members, you know, we don't get paid for this thing, and y'all are bringing up some real thoughts and ideas. And here's the thing, y'all are thinking globally. That's amazing. That's really what is needed on this for the thousands of people that we're recommending and affecting. And certainly it helps me when I go to the board with some of these conversations. If there is additional heartfelt issues and concerns, those can be brought up. So if they, you know, if board chairs ask me questions, I will be well prepared, and thank you for preparing us and we about this, and it is a we thing. So y'all, thanks.
Thank you.
Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank
We
you.
don't need to make a motion. No, we're good. All right. Have a good night.
Thank you. I did want to say Susie is awesome.